He stood on the boardwalk like he'd been waiting there his whole life. The little boy was no taller than the general store's windowsill, boots scuffed, hair uncombed, eyes the color of burnt wheat. In one hand he clutched a crumpled dollar bill, in the other a small tin toy, its wheel long since broken off. He wasn't crying. He wasn't begging. He was just waiting. Lena Moore almost missed him. She just finished helping Mr. Barlow load his wagon with flour sacks when she turned and saw the child staring up at her like he already knew her name. "Ma'am," he asked, soft but sure. She paused, blinking. "Yes." He lifted the dollar. "I want to buy a mama." The words hit her harder than any slap. Mr. Barlow stopped mid-motion behind her. A few passers-by slowed. Even the clink of glass from the saloon down the street quieted, as if the whole town of Drake Hollow had paused to hear the boy's request. Lena stepped forward slowly. "What did you say?" The boy didn't look away. He just pointed right at her and repeated it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "I got $1. I want to buy you." Then, almost as an afterthought, "You look like a nice mama." And just like that, Lena Moore's world cracked down the middle. She didn't take the dollar. She took his hand. The boy said his name was Tommy, just Tommy, no last name, no people, no story really, at least not one he knew how to tell. He said he'd walked from the hills, but no one knew of any homestead out there since the fire last spring. He had no shoes that fit, no coat, no papers. But he had the dollar. "Who gave it to you?" she asked. "The preacher," Tommy said to use it when I found who I was looking for." "And that's me." "I think so." You smiled at me. That was all it had taken, apparently. A smile. The kind Lena gave everyone. The kind that cost her nothing, except now maybe it had cost her everything. Because she brought him home. Just for a night. Just until the sheriff could figure things out. But nothing was ever just for a night. Not in Drake Hollow. The house was too quiet with just her in it, had been for years. After Thomas died, and then the child she never got to meet, the rooms turned cold. She never lit the parlor stove anymore. The second bedroom had stayed shut for 6 winters. Until now. Tommy didn't ask questions. He just walked the house like he'd known it in a dream, picked up a book off the shelf and turned it upside down like he thought maybe words could spill out. He set his broken toy carefully on the windowsill, like it might grow roots if the sun touched it long enough. That first night he didn't cry. Lena did. Quietly in the kitchen, as she scrubbed dishes that were already clean. She told herself it was just a kindness, a pause, a breath before handing him off to the right authorities. But when the sheriff came the next morning, Tommy hid. Not under the bed. Not in a closet. He climbed onto the roof and tucked himself into the pitch between rafters. "He won't go," Lena said, breathless after climbing up halfway herself. "He's scared." "Scared of what?" Sheriff Danner asked. "Of being forgotten." It was the only answer that made sense, and maybe the only one she needed. Sheriff Danner stepped back. "We'll give it a week." Lena didn't argue. She didn't want to. On the third night the knocks came. Not to her door. To her window. 3 soft and slow. Tap. 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 She rose with the lantern and opened the curtain. No one was there. Just the broken toy on the sill. But now it had 2 wheels. The next morning, Tommy sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped around a cup of warm milk. "You sleep all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Better when there's someone close." Lena smiled, wiping flour from her hands. "Well, I'm not going far." Tommy tilted his head. "You hear the tapping." Her heart paused. "You did." He nodded again. She's making sure. Who is? Tommy looked down at the table. Didn't answer. By the end of the week, Lena had bought him new boots. The preacher came by to ask questions, but he didn't press when he saw the way Tommy leaned into her side. And when Sheriff Danner returned with a telegram from a town 2 valleys over, one that had a school for boys with no kin, Lena didn't even read it. "I'm keeping him," she said. The sheriff didn't argue, just warned her gently. Kids that come out of nowhere sometimes carry things with them. "So do adults," Lena said. "Difference is we're better at hiding it." Then came the mirror. It shattered. On its own. She'd left it on the wall, untouched for years, a gift from her husband once. She passed it every morning without thinking. Then one day it wasn't glass anymore. It was water. She swore she saw a face in it. Not hers, not Tommy's, someone older, someone hungry. And when she looked away, it shattered with a sound like breath drawn in reverse. Tommy didn't flinch when it happened. He just said quietly, "She knows I chose you." That night he crawled into her bed, said he had a nightmare. She let him. He curled up beside her like he'd always belonged there. "Tommy," she whispered, "what happened to your real mama?" He was quiet a long time. Then he whispered something that chilled her more than the broken mirror. She got bought by someone else. By morning, there were footprints in the hallway. Wet ones. But they didn't come from Tommy. He was still asleep, dry and warm. Lena followed the prints down the steps, across the parlor to the front door, then back up again. Not out. Not away. Back in. As if someone else had come in during the night. And stood by Tommy's bed. Lena didn't sleep the next night. She sat in the rocking chair outside Tommy's door, wrapped in her late husband's wool coat, a lantern burning low beside her. The hallway creaked. The window groaned. The wind ran its fingers along the shingles like someone knocking to be let in. But no footprints this time. Just silence. And Tommy slept straight through. By morning, the boy yawned, stretched, and padded out to the kitchen barefoot like nothing was wrong. Lena studied him. He looked healthier already. His cheeks fuller, the shadows under his eyes faded. He even laughed, a short, crooked sound that hadn't come out of him until that morning when he'd seen a squirrel tumble off the fence trying to chase a bird. It was that laugh, the innocent kind, that made her hesitate to ask about the night visitors again. But she did. "Do you remember who she was, the woman who had you before me?" Tommy's face fell just slightly. "I remember her hands." "What about them?" "They were wrapped up. In bandages." He nodded slowly. "She never bled, but she always wrapped M, said it kept the voices in." Lena blinked. Voices. She said they'd come out if the skin broke. "Who told her that?" Tommy's voice went smaller. "The man who bought her." And Lena's stomach dropped. The sheriff came again that afternoon. But not alone. He brought a man and woman, strangers with long coats and tight smiles. They said they were from some sort of charitable home east of the county lines, a place called New Providence. Their buggy was too clean, their horses too quiet, and their eyes never once landed on Tommy like he was a child. Only like he was a case. "You must be Miss Moore," the woman said, smiling too brightly. "We've heard such wonderful things about your compassion." Lena folded her arms. "I bet you have." "We'd love to speak to the boy. Just a few questions, of course, nothing intrusive." "He's not some criminal under investigation." "Of course not. Just a lost little soul in need of structure." Lena turned to Sheriff Danner. "You bringing them here means what exactly?" "Means the judge will want their input. He's due in town next week." "And what if Tommy doesn't want to go with them?" Won't matter, not legally. Lena's jaw tightened. Then it's a good thing the law ain't raised him these past days. I have. Miss Moore, if you think I'm handing that child over to someone who doesn't even kneel to speak to him, you can tie my hands and drag me. The sheriff didn't argue, he just tipped his hat. I had to bring M, but I didn't say I'd recommend it. And with that he turned and left. The couple lingered. But not long. Tommy stood in the doorway behind Lena, silent and watchful. The man from New Providence noticed him last. His smile faltered. For just a second. Then he nodded toward the child. We'll be back with paperwork. Lena didn't flinch. I'll be here. They left. Tommy reached for her hand. They smell like vinegar and something that burns. She nodded. They smelled wrong to me too. That night she locked every door, bolted every window, lit 2 lanterns, and kept the poker from the fireplace beside her bed. But still, she dreamed. In her dream she was standing in a room that didn't belong to her. White walls, no windows, just a row of beds, each with a child, each wrapped in thin gray blankets, each muzzled. Their faces were covered in cloth. Only their eyes showed. Wide hollow. Begging. Lena moved to pull one blanket back, and a voice behind her said, "If you take it off, it'll come for you too." She turned and saw a woman in a nurse's uniform, face shadowed, hands wrapped in linen. "Who are you?" Lena asked. The woman said nothing, just lifted one finger to her lips, then leaned down and whispered something to the nearest child. The child began to scream, but there was no sound, only the rising of dust from their blanket and the rattling of metal beneath the bed. Lena woke with a cry in her throat, and the mirror on her wall, the one she'd already replaced, was cracked again. This time not shattered, but cracked down the center, like it had been split between 2 worlds. Tommy stood in the hallway. He wasn't sleepwalking. He was standing straight, looking right at her door. "She's getting closer," he said. Lena's heart seized. Who? The one who says mamas can be bought. She's not real, Tommy. She's more real than me. And then for the first time, Lena believed him. She visited the preacher that morning. Reverend Coulter was an old man, near blind, but his voice was steady as ever. "I remember that boy," he said, after she described Tommy's arrival. "Found him curled up at the base of the chapel steps. Looked like he'd walked straight out of the mountain." "Did he say where he came from?" "Said his name, said he was waiting for a mama. I asked him what kind. He said the kind that don't sell easy. I gave him the $1 and told him to wait on the right one." "Why me?" Reverend Coulter smiled faintly. "I didn't tell him who, but he saw you walking across the square a minute later and said, 'That's her.' Never blinked. There's something following him." "No, Miss Moore, there's something he walked away from. That's different. Means it's still mad." "How do I stop it?" He hesitated, then reached under the pulpit and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped book, bound in red thread, pages yellowed and water-damaged. "This ain't scripture," he said quietly, "but it's something older. You keep this close. If it opens on its own, don't read out loud, just listen." "Listen to what?" "To the parts that already know your name." The book didn't open that night, but the front door did. At 2:13 a.m. No knock. No footsteps. Just a quiet click and a slow creak as cold air slipped in. Tommy was already awake when Lena reached his room. He stood by the window again, looking out. "She's in the orchard," he said. "What orchard?" "The one behind the house." "There is no orchard behind the house." He looked up at her, eyes darker than they'd been yesterday. Not sick, not scared. Just older. There is now. Lena stepped to the window and drew back the curtain. And sure enough, past the back fence, where once was only scrub grass and snow-bent trees, stood a row of fruit trees, gnarled and black, heavy with something that looked like apples but sagged like wet cloth. She gasped. Tommy pressed his forehead to the glass. Don't go out there, Miss Lena. I wasn't planning to. Good, 'cause she's not after you yet. Yet. Tommy nodded, then turned and walked back to bed like the conversation had never happened. By sunrise, the orchard was gone. Lena stood on the back porch, her boots in morning frost, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, and stared at the empty space behind the house. It was all grass again, bent from snow, yellowing from cold, but flat and ordinary. No trees. No fruit. No blackened branches. But the prints were still there. Not boot tracks, bare feet. 12 pairs, maybe more, pacing around where the trunks should have been. Small, narrow prints with deep-set heels, like the kind children might leave if they'd been standing still too long. She didn't call the sheriff. She didn't speak to Tommy about it either. Instead, she went inside, locked the back door, and took the preacher's strange book down from the shelf where she'd hidden it behind her cookbooks. The red thread binding it was warm in her hand. It trembled slightly when she opened the first page. But the pages were blank. Every one of them. Until she flipped back to the beginning and saw a name scrawled faintly across the inner cover in ink the color of ash. Timur. Her breath caught. She hadn't written it. And Tommy couldn't write. At least not like that. She touched the name and the ink smeared, not wet but as if it had been written in soot. And beneath the name, another line appeared slowly, letter by letter, like it was bleeding through the paper. The fruit hangs heavy in places forgotten. Do not eat what weeps. She slammed the book shut. That afternoon, Tommy didn't speak. Not like usual. Not even during lunch when he normally asked 3 dozen questions. Why the sky was blue, why potatoes had eyes, what thunder was made of. Today he just stared out the window, chewing slowly, his brow furrowed in a way too old for a child. You feelin' all right? Lena asked gently. He shrugged. Do you want to tell me what's on your mind? Another shrug. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Tommy. He flinched, but only slightly. Then he looked at her. They found the other boys, he said. The ones that got away first. She didn't like that. Who's she? The orchard lady. Is she the one who was your? He shook his head. She was never anybody's. She just waits. When kids don't get picked, she picks them. Picked for what? Tommy didn't answer. He just looked at the broken toy still on the windowsill, the one that somehow fixed itself. Except now it was gone again. Replaced by a different toy. One Lena had never seen. A wooden top hand-painted, the colors dull but precise. She picked it up slowly. Is this yours? Tommy paled. That was Cal's. Who's Cal? He tried to run. From where? From the place before New Providence. She turned the top over in her hands. It was perfectly balanced, real craftsmanship, too fine to be a child's handmade thing, but when she spun it across the table, it spun silently. Not a sound. Not even a whisper of friction. Tommy pushed back from the table and ran to the corner of the room, hands over his ears. Stop it. Lena grabbed the top mid-spin. Tommy, it's just a toy. He shook his head violently. No, it's a whisper. That's how she calls us. Spinning and spinning till you can't stop listening. She pocketed the top and sat beside him, pulling him into her lap. She's not taking you, not while I'm breathing. Tommy looked up, She doesn't need to take if you give. That hit her like a nail through the heart. You think I'd give you up? If she made you remember. Remember what? Tommy opened his mouth. But before he could speak, the wind outside rose suddenly, howling against the house like a wolf scraping at the siding. The windows shuddered. The lamp above the stove flickered once, twice, then went out entirely. And in the silence that followed, Lena heard it. Tapping. Not from the window this time. From inside the walls. Tap. 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 Tommy's arms clenched around her middle. She found the door. What door? He pointed to the floor. To the space beneath the rug. The trapdoor hadn't been opened in years. Lena had forgotten it was even there, hidden beneath the corner rug in the parlor, sealed with rusted hinges and an iron ring. Her husband had once stored storm supplies down there, years before the cellar flooded, and they'd sealed it up for good. But Tommy stood beside it like it was familiar. Like he'd seen it in a dream. If you open it, she'll come through. Then we won't. But if we don't, she'll stay in the walls, and she's louder there. Lena stepped back. The tapping stopped. Just for a moment. Then came knocking. 3 slow raps. Boom. 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 Lena knelt down, pressed her hand against the wood. It wasn't cold. It was warm. Like breath. She jerked back. We're boarding it shut, she said, heart racing. Tommy shook his head. She'll find another way. Lena grabbed a hammer and nails. She didn't care. She boarded it shut anyway. Then pushed the rug back and placed the heaviest chair she owned over it. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did Tommy. The next morning, Reverend Coulter was gone. The church doors were open. The pews empty. And a single line had been carved into the pulpit in tiny, almost childlike script. She walks on roots, not feet. She drinks from the mouths of sleeping boys. And beneath it, the preacher's Bible. Open to a page Lena didn't recognize. It wasn't even scripture. Just a drawing. Of the orchard. 12 trees. Each one hung with something heavy. Not fruit. Not lanterns. But shoes. Child-sized. Still muddy. Still damp. Lena stumbled out of the chapel and nearly vomited. Back home, Tommy sat on the floor, the strange red-threaded book in his lap. She's not hiding anymore, he said without looking up. She knows it's almost time. Time for what? For the dollar to run out. What does that mean? It wasn't just money, it was a trade, one mama for one memory. Whose memory? He looked at her now. His eyes weren't a boy's anymore. They were a man's. A broken one. Yours. That night the dollar was gone. She kept it in the cupboard above the stove, folded inside her old wedding Bible. But when she opened it, gone. And in its place, a lock of dark hair wrapped in twine. Tommy's hair was light. This wasn't his. It was Lena's. From before. From when she'd lost the baby. But how? How could something that never came to be leave behind something so real? She ran to Tommy's room. He was sitting up in bed, eyes open. Did you take the dollar? He shook his head. Did you give it back? I didn't have to. Why not? Tommy touched the center of his chest. 'Cause I never needed it. She just needed you to remember what you paid for. Lena's knees buckled. She sat on the floor, tears stinging her eyes. I didn't pay for anything. You did, a long time ago, when you lost the baby, when you said you'd give anything just to have a child call you mama. That was a prayer. Not all prayers go where you think. So what are you? Tommy stared down at his hands. I'm the part of your promise she liked best, the part that meant it. Then why is she trying to take you? Because I chose you instead of her. Lena pulled him into her arms. You're mine. I don't care what bargain I made. You're mine. Even if it means remembering what else you gave up. She didn't hesitate. Another showed a boy running. Another showed the inside of a room Lena had never seen, all white walls and small metal beds with straps. Tommy pointed to one shard. That's where Cal went. What are these windows? Tommy shook his head. No, they're doors, and once they're open they stay. Behind them, a sound rose from the open cellar. A dragging sound. Like bare feet pulling through gravel. Lena turned, raised the poker, and saw the first hand appear on the edge of the trapdoor. It was bandaged, all the way to the elbow, wrapped in linen so old it had yellowed and split at the seams. The fingers were long, too long, and beneath the frayed gauze something shifted in the joints, like bones were still trying to find their proper place. Tommy didn't move, he just watched. If you hurt her, the others might not come back. What others? Lena demanded, voice hoarse. The ones who chose too late. The hand gripped the floorboard, another followed, then a head rose into view. Wrapped too, but not with care, with desperation. The fabric was knotted, twisted, soaked through in places where moisture had once leaked out and dried. The bandages covered every inch of the face except for the eyes. And the eyes weren't human. They were holes. Black, depthless still, but hungry. Lena backed up slowly. What does she want? Tommy didn't blink. To be picked. The figure dragged itself higher, now halfway out of the cellar. Its limbs unfolded like someone learning to walk again after years without a body. Lena gritted her teeth and raised the poker. You need to leave. The figure paused. Then something clicked beneath the gauze. And it spoke. But not with a voice. With wind. It howled through the house, rushing down the hallways, rustling every curtain, slamming every door. The pages of the red-threaded book flipped open again on the counter. One page tore loose and flew to the ground. Words appeared on it, inked by an unseen hand. She feeds on what is owed. She waits where deals were made. She counts the days with blood and bone. And you. You forgot to count. Lena ran to the page, snatched it up. What does it mean? Tommy stepped forward, his face grim. You didn't just wish for a child, you traded. Traded what? Your voice in heaven, your name in memory, your chance to rest. That's not a fair deal. She doesn't deal fair, she only deals final. The woman, the orchard lady, reached the floor now. She rose slowly to her feet, head still bowed, bandaged face staring at the ground. She lifted one arm and pointed. Directly at Tommy. Lena stepped in front of him. No. The woman tilted her head. Wind tore through the house again. And every mirror, every shard, every glass rattled in place. Some cracked. Some fogged. All reflected Lena. But not as she was. In each one she saw herself holding a different child. Each child had no face, only wrapped heads, limbs heavy like they were sleeping. Each reflection showed her rocking them, feeding them, telling them stories, and then setting them down beneath orchard trees, and walking away. These are lies, Lena whispered. Tommy stared at one reflection longer than the others. No, these are memories. Lena's knees buckled. I don't remember this, I don't remember this. Because you traded them away. The woman began to walk forward now. Slow. Measured. She didn't limp, she didn't stagger. She glided, and with every step, the lights in the house dimmed. Lena ran, dragged Tommy down the hall, and threw open the front door. But the orchard was back. Right there, on her porch. Rows and rows of blackened trees, fruit hanging low, the same shapes, the same hush, only now they were in bloom. And the fruit. They weren't fruit. Not really. They were faces. Wrapped in linen, bound in silence. Dozens of small, soft outlines hanging from the branches like offerings. And from each came a faint, muffled cry. Lena screamed and slammed the door shut. Behind her, the woman had stopped walking. She stood now in the center of the room, head still bowed. And she opened her hands. Inside one, Lena's wedding ring. Inside the other, the dollar. "Why now?" Lena asked, voice breaking. "Why are you doing this now?" Tommy didn't answer. But the wind did. It whispered one word, over and over. Do. 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 Lena fell to her knees. "Then take me." The wind paused. Tommy gasped, "No, Miss Lena." "Take me, leave him. Whatever I gave, I give again, just take me instead." The woman raised her head slightly. The gauze covering her face began to fray. Peel. Fall away. And beneath it was Lena's face. Older, worn, eyes hollow. Lips bloodless, but unmistakably hers. Tommy grabbed Lena's hand. "Don't look." "Why?" "Because she isn't just you. She's the you that stayed in the deal, the one that didn't pick me." Lena couldn't look away. And in her mind, something broke open. A memory of a cold hospital room. A nurse wrapping her arms. A voice whispering in her ear. "He's gone, I'm sorry." And then, the orchard. An empty field, a voice offering comfort. A hand holding hers. A choice. "Would you like another chance, dear? It won't come cheap, but it'll feel like love." She had nodded. Just once. And then forgetting. The years that followed, the loneliness, the call from the sheriff, the boy in the square, the dollar. All of it given to her. For a price. Lena stood, steady now, and stared at the woman with her face. "You want me back?" The orchard lady didn't speak. Just held out the ring. And the dollar. Tommy stepped between them. "If she takes you, I go too." "No, baby. You made the trade, but I made a promise." Lena's hand shook. She reached for the ring. Paused. Then turned to Tommy. "I'm not trading again. Not now, not ever." She turned to the woman and shouted, "Take it all back. I'd rather remember the pain than forget the price." And the house exploded with wind. The walls shook. The windows shattered outward. The trees vanished in a blast of dust and ash. The woman screamed, a sound that rattled the boards and burst into a cloud of petals and gauze, spinning upward into the chimney like smoke. Then silence. Utter silence. Tommy clung to Lena. She wept into his hair. And when she looked up, the trapdoor was gone. No rug, no floorboards, just smooth wood. The mirrors were intact. The top on the table was missing. And the house smelled of pine and earth again. But the red-threaded book still sat on the counter. And the page she'd read earlier had one new line. "You remembered, that's enough for now." The days after the wind settled were quiet. Not peaceful quiet, like a hush after something sacred had been unearthed. The kind of quiet that isn't a gift but a warning. Even the crows stopped cawing. Even the clock on the mantel ticked softer, as if the house was learning how to breathe again. Lena cleaned in silence. She moved through the house like someone remembering how to live, gathering glass from the shattered windows, patching what she could with boards, wrapping the rest in thick cloth. She swept ash from the corners. She scrubbed the floors until her knuckles bled. But she didn't throw the book away. She couldn't. The red-threaded thing still sat on the table each morning, no matter where she hid it the night before. She stuffed it in a drawer once, found it beneath her pillow at dawn, tossed it in the stove, and woke the next day to find it laid gently in her hands. So she stopped fighting it. She let it stay. And each night before bed, she opened to the last page and read the new lines that hadn't been there the night before. When you plant regret, you grow hunger. When you feed it silence, it learns to scream. But when you speak it aloud, it can be buried. She didn't understand it all, but she understood enough. Still, it wasn't the book that haunted her now. It was the orchard. Or what had been there. Because though the trees were gone, the shape of them remained in her memory. Clear, perfect rows, leaves trembling with faces, each fruit a life that could have been or maybe once was. And she hadn't imagined them. Because every morning she found something new. Another toy carved from wood, placed gently on the porch steps. No tracks, no footprints. Just the toys. A spinning top, a train missing one wheel, a doll with button eyes, a flute that made no sound. She collected them in a basket. By the end of the week, the basket overflowed. "She's not done," Tommy said one evening, watching her from the doorway. "She's gone," Lena replied. "We broke the deal." He shook his head. "She's never gone, not when others still owe. You said I remembered, that was enough. Enough to close the door, not enough to lock it." Lena swallowed. Her hands trembled as she folded a small paper crane that had appeared on her windowsill. "Then what do I do now?" Tommy walked to the fireplace, pulled the book from the table, set it in her lap. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "You read what you buried." "I don't remember burying anything." "That's the problem." She didn't want to open the book again. She hoped it was over. That remembering was enough. That the orchard, the woman with her face, the price she had paid, it had all been swept away. But hope was fragile. And the book, it waited. So she opened it. And this time the pages weren't blank. They were full. Sketches, words, names, dates. And faces. Children's faces. Some familiar. Most not. Each page held a story. Not long ones, just fragments, like obituary clippings torn from the truth, like memories stolen and scribbled down in a rush. Marla, age 6, found at the edge of Greystone Hollow, mouth sewn shut, no prints in the snow. Benny, 8, last seen near the old well, returned 3 days later holding a pine cone like it was gold, didn't speak again. Rosie, 4, disappeared during supper, came back with a flower no one had ever seen, said it was for her other mama. The pages went on. Dozens of them. Dozens of children. Each tied to town Lena had passed through once in her life. Each somehow familiar. "No, I only wanted one child. I only wanted you." And she heard that, but she doesn't give anything for free. Lena closed the book gently. Her fingers lingered on the thread binding. Then what's she asking now? Tommy looked toward the window. The wind had picked up again. And in the distance, just beyond the ridge, a single tree stood. Alone. New. "She planted a seed," he said. "Where?" "In you." Lena didn't dream that night. She remembered. Not through nightmares, through waking. She sat upright in bed, sweat slick on her skin, heart pounding, not from fear but from clarity. Because the orchard woman wasn't a stranger. She was a version, not just of Lena, but of every woman who had ever begged for a child, or mourned one, or sat at the edge of a crib wondering what went wrong. She was grief made patient. She was love twisted by loss. And when Lena had whispered into the dark of her hospital room after her baby had passed, she hadn't just mourned. She had offered, "I'd give anything, Lord. I'd give it all, just don't let me be alone forever." And something had listened. But not God. Something else. Something that waited beneath roots and loam. Something that heard what heaven would not answer. That was the seed. That was the orchard. At dawn, Lena took the book and the basket of toys and walked to the ridge. Tommy tried to follow. "No," she said gently, "this part's mine." The hill was higher than she remembered, the wind colder, the trees nearby bent as if trying to lean away from what waited at the top. And there it was. The new tree. Alone. Fresh bark, no leaves yet, no branches. Just a single trunk, gray as ash. She set the book at its base. Then the toys. One by one. And finally her ring. She placed it in the crook of a root, just starting to curl from the dirt. The wind picked up. Not a howl. Not a shriek. Just a sigh. And the tree shuddered. Its bark rippled like flesh. And from its side a small bloom opened. A flower. The same flower from Rosie's story. 5 petals, white, tipped in red. She didn't pluck it. She didn't touch it. She just whispered, "I remember." And the flower folded back into the tree. When Lena returned home, Tommy was on the porch with the red-threaded book in his lap. "Did it work?" he asked. "I think so." "Is she gone?" "I don't know." "Are you scared?" Lena sat beside him and looked out at the hills. The ridge stood quiet, but the wind was still restless. "A little," she admitted. "Me too," he said. Then he handed her the book. It was warm again, but the thread was coming loose. One end frayed, the binding pulling apart like it had finally finished its story. When she opened it, only one sentence remained. The boy was never a debt, he was the answer. Lena wept. Not from fear. Not from regret. But from something deeper. Something like peace. The next few weeks passed gently. Tommy laughed again, not all the time but sometimes. He played with the toys in the basket, never asking where they came from. The house stayed quiet. No more whispers, no more bandaged figures. The mirrors stayed whole. And the tree on the ridge. It bloomed. Not with faces. Not with fruit. But with flowers. White ones. Every morning, Lena picked one and placed it in a jar by the window. A reminder, she told Tommy. Of what? That sometimes the only way to break a curse is to tell the truth. But peace doesn't last forever. Not here. Because one night, as the wind died down and Lena folded laundry near the fire, Tommy walked in holding something in both hands. "It was on the porch," he said. She turned, and her breath caught. It was $1. Crisp, unmarked, folded once. No note. No explanation. Just $1. Tommy held it out. "Does this mean someone else is asking?" Lena took it slowly. And in the moment, her fingers touched the paper. The house went still again. Utterly still. No wind. No sound. No clock ticking. Just a hush. Like a seed had been planted. Somewhere new. Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen with the dollar resting in the center of the table, lit only by the soft glow of the oil lamp. The house was silent again, that kind of silence that didn't feel like rest, but watching. Tommy had long since gone to bed, though he hadn't spoken much after handing it to her. He just stared a little too long at the porch as she closed the door and locked it behind them. She didn't want to touch it again. Didn't want to look at it even. But there it lay, folded once, corners sharp, a simple dollar that might have come from any man's pocket or from somewhere deeper. The red-threaded book sat nearby, closed. She hadn't dared open it yet. Not since the final line had appeared. The boy was never a debt. He was the answer. If the story was done, why was it here again? Why had someone else left a dollar on her porch? Or worse, something. Lena finally reached out and unfolded it. The paper crackled, not with age but with expectation. Her breath held, but the dollar was plain, no markings, no words, no symbol pressed into the ink, not even a wrinkle out of place. Still she knew. It wasn't for her. It was through her. And as the hour crept toward midnight, she heard it. A knock. Once. Twice. Soft. Weak. The kind of knock that sounded more like asking permission than demanding entry. Lena stood slowly, her joints stiff from sitting so long. She didn't light another lamp, didn't grab a weapon. She only slipped the dollar into her apron and walked to the door. Through the small pane of glass, she could see a figure. Small. Unmoving. A child. She opened the door. There he stood, maybe 7 years old, maybe less, face smudged with dirt, clothes torn not from wear but from travel, and his eyes brown, wide, and filled with a kind of hollow hope. He held out a note. Just one line, printed carefully in crayon. She said, "You're the one who can give me a mama." Lena's throat clenched. Behind him the night was too still. The air had that same wrong cold, the kind that wasn't winter but something colder. She knelt in the doorway. "What's your name, baby?" He looked down at his shoes. Then whispered, "Joseph." "How long you been walking, Joseph?" He shrugged. Since the red thread tugged. Her eyes flicked to the dollar. Not paper. Thread. Invisible, maybe. But felt. She stepped aside. "Come in, it's warm here." Joseph didn't move. She said, "I couldn't unless I was picked." Lena swallowed hard. Then held out her hand. "I pick you." And with those 3 words the thread snapped. Or so she thought. Joseph stepped inside, and the wind slammed the door shut behind him. Tommy woke to the sound of humming. Low, gentle, not Lena's voice. He crept from his room to the edge of the hallway and peeked into the kitchen. Joseph sat at the table, sipping hot tea from Lena's favorite cup. His feet didn't reach the floor. His hands shook as he held the mug. But his face looked calmer than any boy his age had a right to be. Lena sat across from him, the red-threaded book open again, pages flipping gently in a breeze that wasn't blowing. Tommy walked in. "Where did he come from?" Lena looked up. "The same place you did." Joseph didn't flinch. He looked at Tommy, then said, "I'm not supposed to stay. I'm just supposed to deliver something." Tommy froze. "What?" Joseph pulled a second note from his coat. This one was older, torn at the edges, written in faded ink, not crayon. He handed it to Lena. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. One sentence. "You remembered your part, but others have forgotten theirs." Beneath that a name. Margaret Trenwith. Lena's heart stopped. She knew that name. Years ago, before her baby, before the hospital, before the orchard dreams, there was a neighbor, older woman, kind smile, no children, but always baking pies and slipping coins into church baskets. They'd grown close, talked over fences. shared jars of jam and secrets too bitter to tell husbands. And one autumn night, Margaret had cried on her porch. "I asked once too," she whispered. "I begged, he didn't answer, but something else did." Lena never pressed. She'd chalked it up to grief, to loneliness. But now, Joseph slid off the chair. She forgot her part. I'm supposed to remind her. "She's still alive?" Lena asked. "Not exactly," he said. He pointed to the book. It had flipped to a new page. A map. Crude, sketched in ink like veins. A trail leading into the woods past the old sawmill. A red X marked a small clearing. Tommy leaned in. "That's near the hollow." Lena nodded slowly. "Where the orchard used to be." Joseph corrected her. "Where it's growing again." They set out just after dawn. Joseph led. The boy didn't ask questions, didn't tire. He moved like someone who'd walked this path many times before, though his face still held that childlike fragility. He hummed when the wind picked up. He paused only once when they passed a creek bed filled with frost. He pointed to the water. "This is where Benny was found." Lena stared down at the frozen creek. There was no sign of anything living, but just beneath the surface, she thought she saw something move. A doll's eye. No. Just a stone. Why not? Because the orchard doesn't grow from things given willingly. It feeds on what people hide. Lena closed the locket. The wind stirred, and all around the hollow, leaves began to grow from the dirt. No trees yet, but leaves. Like the roots were close to the surface. Like the orchard was waiting. But they didn't return home that night. Instead, they built a fire near the edge of the ridge, far from the hollow, close to the first tree that still bloomed in white. Joseph curled beside it, hands folded over his chest like he was part of the roots. Tommy didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "If more people made trades, how many children are out there like me?" Lena didn't lie. "Too many. And if they all forgot, what happens to the ones who remember?" She touched his shoulder gently. "They carry the stories until someone listens." He looked up at her. "You think they will?" Lena glanced at the book in her lap. The thread binding was almost gone now, just a few loops left, barely holding it together. And inside, the pages had begun to curl. But the last one now held a new line. When one child remembers, the orchard weakens. When one mother tells the truth, the trees lose their teeth. She closed the book. "I think they already are." But in her heart she knew. One tree still stood. And if that thread on the book broke before she found the others like Joseph, the orchard would start to grow again. It always did. Because there were always mothers mourning. And always something in the dark that listened. The next morning, Joseph was gone. Lena awoke just before sunrise, the fire down to its last embers, the wind slow and steady through the trees. Tommy still slept beside her, curled beneath the heavy quilt they'd carried from the house. But Joseph's spot by the flowered tree was empty, not disturbed, just empty. No prints. No sign of struggle. Just a folded piece of cloth left in his place. The same linen that had once wrapped Margaret's locket, now creased and bound in a neat knot. Lena reached down and untied it. Inside she found a final note, written in that careful crayon again. "Thank you for picking me. I remembered what I needed to say." She listened, and the tree bloomed. Below it, drawn in red, a single flower with 6 petals. She stared at it for a long time. 6 petals, not 5 like before. The orchard was changing. Maybe weakening. Maybe waking. She didn't know which. Tommy stirred beside her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He's gone. Lena nodded. He left the note. Does that mean it's over? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the flowered tree nearby, its white blossoms glowing faintly in the dawn light, unmoving even as the wind whispered around it. I think it means something finished, but something else is starting. Tommy frowned, not understanding. And in truth, neither did she. But she felt it, deep in her ribs, in the hollow behind her heart, the way a storm hums before it ever touches land. She folded the note and tucked it inside the red-threaded book, which had grown almost weightless in her hands now. The binding had unraveled completely. The pages no longer flipped in the wind. They simply waited. So she carried it home. For 3 days, the house was quiet again. No knocks, no visitors, no red strings, not even toys on the porch. It almost felt normal. Tommy read books, helped feed the goats, even found a bird's nest under the porch and built a little shelter for it. Lena baked again, biscuits and apple tarts just like she used to. But each night before sleep, she sat at the table and opened the threadless book. Nothing ever appeared. Until the 4th night, when Tommy was already asleep and the wind had picked up sharp from the east. Lena flipped to the last page. There, written in tiny, narrow script, one new line. 3 more debts sleep beneath your floor. She sat frozen. 3. Beneath the floor. The message faded as she stared at it, like it had only needed to be seen, not remembered. And then she heard it. A creak. Just one. From under the house. The kind of creak that comes from weight, not wind, not settling wood, but footsteps. She stood, candle in hand, and crept to the trapdoor near the hearth. It hadn't been opened in years. Not since her husband had died. It groaned as she lifted it. Cold air rose from the root cellar below, earthy and wet, but now tinged with something else. Sweetness. The scent of overripe fruit. The same scent from the orchard. Lena descended the wooden steps slowly, candlelight casting flickers across the dirt walls. The cellar had once been used for storing preserves and potatoes, but most of the shelves were empty now. At the far end, behind a stack of crates, the dirt looked disturbed. Not dug recently, but sifted, as if something had moved just beneath the surface. She dropped to her knees, fingers scraping at the packed soil. And there, no more than a few inches down, her knuckles struck wood. She dug faster. A box. Small, roughly made, unlatched. Inside, a baby blanket. Old, yellowed with time, edges burned. Her breath caught. She knew this. She had buried it after her baby died, couldn't bear to keep it, couldn't bear to let it go. But she had never buried it here. She touched it gently, and something flashed in her mind. A face. Not her child's. Another. A little girl with dark curls and no name. Then, gone. The vision vanished, but her heart pounded. She pulled the blanket free, lifted the box. Another beneath it. This one heavier. She opened it. Toys. Not the ones from the porch. Different. Handmade dolls. A slingshot. A leather-bound Bible with a child's name etched in the inside cover. Micah J. She didn't know a Micah. Not from her life. But something deep inside did. She set the box aside and reached again. This time her hands closed around bones. Small. Fragile. Wrapped in cloth. Her scream never came. She didn't have air for it. Just silence. Just grief. Because now she understood. The orchard hadn't just been hers. The house sat on a seedbed. Of prayers. Of regrets. of mothers who had whispered into the dark, "I'd give anything." And something had listened. Over and over again. She surfaced from the cellar at dawn, hands and arms streaked with soil, the blanket still clutched to her chest. Tommy stood in the doorway, his eyes wide. "They were down there." She nodded. "3 boxes, 3 memories I don't remember having." "Are they yours?" "They are now." She didn't explain further. Instead, she carried the boxes to the ridge. To the tree. It had bloomed fully now. Its branches curled upward like arms open for an embrace. The flowers had changed again, 7 petals. She buried each box beneath the roots. As she placed the last one, the earth trembled. Just once. Then grew still. And in the tree's bark, a small crack opened. Inside it, a heart. Carved. Beating. For just a second. Then gone. She stepped back, breath stolen from her lungs. Tommy whispered, "What now?" Lena looked out over the hills. The wind had shifted again. Carrying voices. Not screaming. Just whispering. Faint, thousands of them. Telling truths they'd been made to forget. "Now," she said softly, "we find the others." The next day, she found her first letter. In the mailbox. No name. No stamp. Just a folded note and a feather inside. The note read, "There's a tree growing in my son's closet. I asked for him to walk again. Now he never leaves the room. Can you help?" She burned the letter. Not in rejection, but as a reply. Smoke, after all, could carry messages just as far. And that night the book returned. Red thread sewn anew. But this time the cover bore a different name. The Orchard Mothers. Plural. Lena smiled faintly and set a second plate at the table. The wind rose, steady but not cruel. The porch creaked, and footsteps approached. The knock came soft, almost hesitant. But Lena didn't flinch, not anymore. She stood from her chair, smoothed the front of her skirt, and opened the door. On the porch stood a woman. Maybe 30, pale, thin in the way people get when they've been grieving longer than eating. She wore a shawl over her shoulders and carried a child, curled tight, asleep or close to it, clinging to her chest. And her eyes held that same look. The one Lena had worn when she found the orchard. The woman spoke before Lena could. "You don't know me, but I was told to find the house with the tree behind it." Lena stepped aside. "You found it." The woman didn't move. She looked down at her child, her voice cracked. "I didn't know what I was saying when I asked. I just wanted her to breathe. I didn't mean to. I didn't know it would grow in her place." Lena placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm. "You're not the first. And she wouldn't be the last." The woman stepped inside, trembling. Lena closed the door. Tommy stood just inside the kitchen, barefoot and quiet, watching. The child stirred in the woman's arms, then opened her eyes, wide, too wide, irises edged in gold. Lena saw it instantly. The orchard was already in her. Not just roots, but leaves, branches, blossoms. Something had grown inside this little girl, and now it fed off her breath. She was still herself, but not alone. Lena moved quickly. She lit a small fire in the hearth, laid down the blanket Joseph had left, set the red-threaded book on the table. Then she knelt before the girl and whispered something only she could hear. The child blinked. A tear rolled down her cheek. The girl pointed to the tree beyond the window. Not the one Joseph had slept beneath. A new one. Grown overnight, it seemed. Its bark pale, its blossoms dark. 7 petals like before. But now the petals were wilting. Lena carried the girl outside. They stood beneath the tree, wind curled around their ankles, and Lena stared at its trunk. Another crack had formed. This one vertical, long as a man's arm. Inside, darkness. She reached forward, and the tree pulled her hand in. Not painfully, not cruelly, just hungry. She yanked it back, heart racing. The girl in her arms had fallen asleep again, peaceful now. But Lena knew. The orchard wasn't gone. It had just changed faces. No longer creeping through root and soil. Now it moved through memories. Through mothers. Through grief so loud it summoned voices in the dark. And Lena couldn't burn it away, not completely. But she could starve it. By remembering. By speaking. By telling the stories no one wanted to say. Tommy. Not because she was giving him up, but because she was claiming him. On her own terms. No deals. No trades. Just a promise that even if the orchard reached for him again, it would have to go through her. And she wasn't the only one anymore. A rustle came from behind her. Voices. Dozens. Children. Mothers. Fathers. Even a few she swore had been dead once, now alive again, not in flesh but in memory. They gathered around the tree. And one by one they began to hum. That old song. Low. Clear. The orchard song turned inside out. Not a lullaby. Not a plea. But a warning. We remember. We choose. We do not beg. We do not forget. The wind picked up. The blossoms fell. The bark cracked. And the orchard screamed. Silently. Loud enough for only those who'd made the trade to hear. And then, it was still. Not gone. Never gone. But no longer fed. No longer hungry. Just sleeping. Waiting. And Lena knew that someday, someone else might whisper again in the dark into a cradle. I'd give anything. But if they did, she'd be listening. And this time she'd answer. Not with silence, but with a story. And a choice.